By the time Vivian built her crooked empire on the ashes of my stolen ranch, I already controlled the mineral rights beneath every single mansion in her shiny development. But let me rewind. Picture this: I'm dodging mortar in Eastern Europe, serving my country, when a call comes through that freezes my blood. Some HOA tyrant named Vivon had legally sold off my grandfather's ranch, 1,500 acres of prime American soil land that's been in my bloodline since 1892, the same ground where my Purple Heart grandfather rests, gone auctioned off for scraps while I was bleeding for freedom on foreign soil. I returned home to the crunch of gravel under the boots of surveyors, strangers hammering stakes into the earth of my family's cemetery. Vivon believed she'd stripped everything away from a broken veteran, too battered to fight back. But what she never realized was that Grandpa had left me one last weapon hidden in those yellowed property deeds from the 1960s. Legal ownership of the land beneath 50 luxury homes valued at $47 million combined. Now ask yourself, what would you do if you came home to find your legacy stolen out from under you? Drop a flag emoji. Tell me where you're watching from, because this nightmare could strike anyone, anywhere across America. This is the story of how one veteran flipped an HOA land grab into the most expensive property lesson these thieves had ever faced. My name is Staff Sergeant Ezra Thornfield, third-generation rancher, and a man who spent 18 brutal months holding the line in Eastern Europe. While I was dodging bullets and grieving the funeral I couldn't attend, an HOA vulture circled my inheritance like a starving buzzard. The Thornfield Ranch, 1,500 acres of rolling hills, untouched pastures, and a crystal-clear lake that outshines anything this side of the Rockies. My grandfather carved it out of nothing after World War II, building it from dust with nothing but his GI Bill, his Purple Heart pension, and his unbreakable will. Every fence post out there was driven by weathered hands that knew the meaning of real work. Every barn beam was hewn from our own timber. This ranch wasn't just dirt and wood, it was 3 generations of American blood, sweat and tears carved into the land itself. Right next door sat Willowmere Estates, a gated playground of 50 lakefront mansions where tech executives and trust fund heirs fork out $200,000 to $500,000 just for the privilege of living next to real America. These people wouldn't know hard labor if it knocked on their designer doors, but they're quick to file complaints about the scent of cattle manure or a rooster greeting the dawn. So picture me, after a nightmare flight home from Germany, into the driveway expecting to see the pastures I grew up with. Instead, I'm hit with the stench of fresh surveyor paint, sprayed across century-old oaks like death warrants. Neon orange sold signs jab into my family's soil like knives. Surveyors in neon vests swarm the land with clipboards, hammering stakes right through Grandpa's prized rose garden. The crushed petals mixing their fragrance with choking diesel fumes from their equipment. 800 acres sold off, allegedly, to the Willowmere HOA for just $2.3 million. That's robbery in broad daylight. $175 an acre, for land worth no less than $8,000. My bank balance, a pitiful $247, and my remaining 700 acres slapped with development restrictions that nobody can or will explain. But the final straw. They fenced off our family cemetery. The sound of chain link clattering in the wind around my grandfather's fresh grave still echoes in my nightmares. That's when I first laid eyes on Vivian Ashworth. If you took every HOA horror story you've ever heard and wrapped it into one person, she'd be the result. 52 years old, white Mercedes G-Wagon worth more than most people make in a year. A woman who literally measures grass height with a ruler. She's filed 47 HOA complaints in a single year. Her victims, families who just wanted peace, and now here she was in my driveway wearing a smirk sharp enough to curdle milk. Military housing allowance doesn't cover property taxes, does it, soldier boy? She sneered, not even bothering with an introduction. Then she shoved a stack of forged documents into my chest. Papers claiming my family had racked up delinquent taxes my bank records proved had been paid in full. Your grandfather should have planned better, she sneered, adjusting sunglasses worth more than my monthly combat pay. This is what happens when military families think they're above civic responsibility. I stood there in uniform, 18 months, fresh from the battlefield, still carrying the dust of Europe on my boots, and this parasite dared to lecture me about patriotism. The hypocrisy burned worse than tear gas. Leave our property immediately, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing. She spat, thumb already on probably her own personal sheriff. Here's the nightmare I was living. Divorce lawyers and endless legal bills had drained my savings down to that miserable $247. The only local attorney worth his salt was Vivian's golf buddy conflicted out. The county clerk's office. Oh, they'd conveniently lost every original property record tied to my ranch. My own bank swore there was no record of the automatic tax payments I'd set up religiously for years. Standing there, watching strangers drive stakes into my grandfather's grave, I made a silent vow. Vivian Ashworth had no clue who she was really dealing with, but I couldn't shake the feeling when I looked at Grandpa's old photos, his half-smile, that knowing glint in his eye, like he'd left me something more than just soil and timber, something hidden, something worth fighting for. The military had drilled into me three things: patience, strategy, and the ability to find an enemy's weak spot. And now, Vivian was about to learn why you never pick a war with a combat veteran guarding his family legacy. But she wasn't content with just stealing land. She wanted my reputation buried too. Within 48 hours of our first encounter, she'd filed a restraining order, claimed I'd threatened her with military-style violence. A complete fabrication. Yet the local judge rubber-stamped it without even looking at my side. Overnight, I was officially barred from half of my own county. That was only her opening move. Next came military-grade security cameras angled directly at my property line, watching me, recording me, as if I were some kind of domestic threat. Then the poison spread. Neighborhood app posts accusing me of aggressive veteran behavior, whispered warnings about PTSD episodes. She was constructing a narrative one post, one rumor, one smear at a time. To her pampered neighbors, I wasn't a rancher defending his land. I was the monster outside the picket fence, threatening their perfect suburban bubble, her matrostroke, hosting community safety meetings. She stood at the podium, wrapped in perfume worth more than a month of my pay, while the stink of her prejudice choked the room. In carefully chosen words, she painted me as the dangerous outsider and undesirable element that needed to be contained. It was character assassination delivered with surgical precision. But here's where Vivian miscalculated. Military intelligence training doesn't evaporate the day you hang up the uniform. While she was busy running a smear campaign on Facebook and whisper networks, I was playing chess, quiet, patient, watching every move. And I remembered something Grandpa used to tell me: when politicians lie, the truth always hides in the paperwork they pray you'll never find. I burned my last $47 on gas and parking, driving 200 miles to the state archives in the capital. The basement smelled of mildew and forgotten history, but those dusty shelves held treasures worth more than Vivian Ashworth's entire jewelry box. There it was. The original 1892 land grant, my grandfather's Purple Heart citations, and the smoking gun proof my land had never been delinquent on taxes. Every payment recorded, every transaction documented, every page stamped out the taxes Vivian claimed never existed. They'd been siphoned off, redirected into the wrong account by a single-digit clerical error. A trick so old my divorce attorney had once warned me about it: corrupt officials creating fake delinquencies, then swooping in to snatch land for pennies. He'd told me owners had redemption rights, and military service added another layer of federal protection. I never thought I'd be the one to need that lifeline. Then, the rot revealed itself. The county assessor who pushed through this so-called emergency sale. He lived in a $340,000 mansion on Willowmere Drive, just blocks from Vivian's empire. Convenient timing, don't you think? But here's where her greed became her own noose. The emergency sale she orchestrated happened 30 days before the legal minimum waiting period. Too impatient, too arrogant to even wait for her theft to be technically legal. That mistake left a trail louder than a fire alarm at 3 a.m. A paper trail that screamed fraud. Armed with evidence, I thought I'd finally found justice. Instead, Vivian doubled down like a cornered rattlesnake. She unleashed a private investigator to dig through the mud of my past, my divorce, my deployments, anything she could twist into scandal. The local newspaper ate it up. Overnight, I wasn't a landowner fighting fraud. I was a troubled veteran who couldn't accept civilian authority. Guess where the editor's wife lived? Willowmere Drive. Small town, smaller loyalties. Then came the harassment. Noise complaints whenever I started the tractor before sunrise. Deputies citing me for disturbing the peace when I ran cattle across my own fields. Citations for unauthorized construction when I fixed a broken fence. It wasn't law enforcement, it was a police state. And the dictator didn't wear a uniform. She wore designer yoga pants and drove a white Mercedes. Vivian's masterpiece wasn't theft. It was cruelty dressed up as genius. I woke up to surveyor stakes driven through my grandfather's rose garden. At 3 a.m., 60 years of living heritage crushed under diesel treads. Security footage showed the HOA groundskeeper carrying out orders that could only have come from one person. When I confronted her, Vivian didn't flinch. Her voice was cold steel. Those roses were encroaching on community property. We have standards to maintain. Standing there in the wreckage, breathing in the bitter mix of rose petals and exhaust, I realized this was no longer about money. This was about domination. Vivian didn't just want land. She fed on humiliation. She got high off breaking people who couldn't fight back. Too bad for high wasn't one of them. Her next move was pure arrogance. She went oolin with the biggest law firm in the capital, the kind of marble lobby temple where billing starts at $800 an hour. A week later, a lawsuit landed on my doorstep. Aggressive trespassing, property damage, $500,000 in damages, plus legal fees. The crown jewel. Her claim that I'd driven cattle across HOA property, my own stolen land. The legal filing described my grandfather's prize, Angus bulls, as dangerous livestock, deliberately weaponized against innocent homeowners. I had to read that line 3 times before I stopped laughing. In Vivian's twisted universe, cows were now classified as assault weapons. But if she wanted a war of lawyers, I had reinforcements. I called the Military Legal Aid Society. On the other end of the line, a crusty old JAG officer listened to my story. His voice crackled like dry leaves when he finally spoke. "Son, this smells fishier than week-old salmon. Let me make some calls." Those calls led me to Sarah Chen, a battle-hardened property rights attorney from the neighboring state. She'd lost her father's farm to the same brand of corruption and made it her mission to dismantle HOA abuse. She worked pro bono for veterans. On our first meeting, Sarah dropped a file thick as a Bible on the table and smiled. "Most HOAs are built on paperwork flaws. Yours might be worse than most." She was right. As we dug into Willow's corporate skeleton, the truth cracked wide open. The HOA had never legally incorporated with the state. For 3 years, they'd been operating like a fake government, collecting fees they had no right to touch, enforcing rules that carried zero legal weight. It was like discovering the neighborhood bully was actually a scrawny 90-pound weakling, stuffed into a rented muscle suit. During deployment, I'd learned a simple truth. Most organizations collapse, not from enemy fire, but from paperwork neglect. Corporate registrations expire, forms get missed, and mighty institutions turn into paper tigers, with no legal bite. Sarah knew it too. If an HOA isn't properly incorporated, she explained, their entire authority can be challenged. Every fee, every fine, every so-called rule could be void. Sometimes homeowners even get years of payments refunded over a single missed form. But the real jackpot came when we dug deeper. Vivian wasn't just hiding behind a faulty HOA. She was feeding off it. Her own landscaping for Moshworth Aesthetics had landed a $180,000 beautification contract the same month the HOA seized my land. She'd literally used the sale of my inheritance to line her own pockets. It was like watching a bank robber demand consulting fees for advising the bank on security breaches. Sarah filed a motion to dismiss all HOA actions based on their illegal corporate status. The courtroom was jammed shoulder to shoulder when Vivian's $800 an hour attorney tried to explain why his client was essentially a criminal organization playing dress-up as a neighborhood association. Watching him sweat through that Armani suit was better than cable television. Vivian, though, was nothing if not desperate. She scrambled to call an emergency HOA meeting, a shameless attempt to retroactively legalize years of corruption. Out of 50 homeowners, only 12 showed up, mostly her diehard cronies, while everyone else was traveling or simply too exhausted from her games. By 11 p.m., fueled on burnt coffee and blind loyalty, they rammed through votes that should have required a majority. The whole spectacle reeked of panic. Vivian's voice had gone shrill, cracking like glass under pressure, like someone clinging to a collapsing empire. 2 days later, the next volley landed. Another process server, another lawsuit. This time, $1.2 million in punitive damages. Vivian claimed my frivolous legal challenges were harassment and threatened to seize my remaining 700 acres to pay. The woman had more gall than a rookie skydiver, but her case was flimsier than wet tissue. I stood on my porch, papers in hand, as my grandfather's wind chimes sang in the breeze. That sound brought back one of his favorite lines: "When your enemy is making mistakes, don't interrupt them." Vivian had just made the biggest one yet. Her paranoia was metastasizing. Since she couldn't crush me, she turned her fury on the entire neighborhood, running Willower Estates like a dictator purging rebels. Christmas lights still up on January 2nd, that's a $200 fine. Someone dared to plant tomatoes in their backyard. 504 unauthorized agricultural activity. It all built to her masterpiece of tyranny, threatening foreclosure on elderly Margaret Clearwater's home over $45 in late fees. Margaret Clearwater was the spark. A retired third-grade teacher still raw from losing her husband to cancer the year before. She'd been drowning under the HOA's endless demands. When she tried to explain her struggles, Vivian's only response was ice cold. Grief doesn't excuse financial irresponsibility. That was the breaking point. You can kick a sleeping dog only so many times before it bites in. The residents of Willower Estates were done being kicked, but Margaret created a small Facebook group she called Willow. 5 members joined the first week. By the second week, there were 43, and the stories they shared, they could have filled a Stephen King anthology of suburban horror. Take Navy veteran Tom Bridgewater. His lawn was immaculate, so immaculate that Vivian cited him 3 separate times for excessive uniformity. Our paths crossed at the hardware store while we were both buying security cameras. He pulled me aside, voice low but steady. "That woman's crazier than a soup sandwich. Son, what can we do to stop her?" That was the moment I knew resistance had teeth. I began hosting Know Your Rights workshops at the local library, laying out everything Sarah and I had uncovered about HOA law. The first night, 8 curious neighbors showed up. The second, 22. By the third, the room was jammed, standing room only. Neighbors scribbling notes like their mortgages depended on it. Considering Vivian's escalating reign of terror, they probably did. Then Margaret dropped a revelation that changed everything. While sorting through her late husband's papers, she found a dusty old folder in the attic. Inside were the original HOA covenants from 1965 documents. her husband had kept when he served on the development committee. The yellowed pages were fragile, but the words were ironclad. The bylaws explicitly forbade the HOA from acquiring land beyond the original 50-lot plat. Vivian's seizure of my property wasn't just questionable under state law. It was illegal under the very foundation of the HOA itself. She hadn't just broken the rules, she'd detonated them. Sarah's eyes lit up when she saw the documents. She explained that Vivian's actions were textbook ultra viresa, Latin term meaning beyond one's legal authority. In plain English, every move Vivian had made outside those covenants was void from the start. As if it had never happened, it was like discovering the mayor had declared war on Canada ludicrous, unauthorized, and legally meaningless. It turned out Vivian wasn't playing chess at all. She was cheating, moving pieces however she pleased while everyone else followed the rules. And thanks to Margaret, we were finally calling her out. But Margaret wasn't finished throwing haymakers. Tom, the Navy vet, had been digging into the HOA's pool maintenance fund. What he uncovered was a financial crime scene. $89,000 siphoned away over 3 years. The money didn't go to the pool, it went straight into Ashworth Aesthetics, Vivian's landscaping company, while neighbors paid inflated fees for premium maintenance. The pool itself rotted into a swamp, algae thick enough to skate on, pumps broken beyond repair, diving boards duct-taped together like bad comedy props. The smell alone, a choking, sour stench that hit you from 50 feet away, told the whole story. Yet somehow, Vivian's company billed $30,000 for deluxe upkeep just last year. When the truth surfaced, Vivian's empire started to wobble. At the next HOA meeting, she went full dictator mode. She showed up flanked by 2 rent-a-cop security guards, scheduled the vote in the middle of a workday so half the neighborhood couldn't attend, and barked legal threats at anyone questioning her numbers. But the mask was slipping. Standing at the podium, her voice cracked higher and sharper with every challenge. Homeowners shouted back, demanding answers. The guards shifted uneasily, realizing they weren't defending order. We're shielding a tyrant from her own people? This is what happens when outside agitators poison a peaceful community. Vivian shrieked, jabbing her finger straight at me. Certain people can't accept that property has changed hands legally. That's when Margaret rose to her feet. Decades of teaching third graders gave her voice an authority no microphone could match. She cut through the chaos like a sword through silk. Vivian, she said, steady and fierce, I've lived here longer than you've been alive. This isn't about agitators. This is about a board member stealing from her neighbors. The room exploded. Applause thundered so loud the community center windows rattled. In that moment, I saw Vivian's empire crumble. Her face froze, her authority cracked, and her power slipped right through her manicured fingers. It was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. And then, just when I thought the fight was turning in our favor, Sarah called. 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Her voice was trembling, but not with fear, with electric excitement. Ezra, she whispered, you'd better sit down. I just found something that makes Vivian's worst nightmare look like a pleasant dream. Sarah had been combing through the original 1960s development records when she stumbled onto a legal time bomb big enough to level Vivian's empire. Back when Willowware Estates was first developed, the original landowner hadn't sold everything. He'd only sold the surface rights. What he held onto were the subsurface rights, minerals, underground access, and, most critically, foundation support. Here's the kicker. In 1963, my grandfather had quietly bought those rights for $500, thinking the minerals might be worth something someday. What he actually purchased was far more powerful. The very ground every mansion in Willowware Estates was resting on. Sarah broke it down in plain English. Ezra, imagine you own a house, but someone else owns the earth your basement is sitting in. That's exactly what happened here. The surface rights belong to the homeowners, but you own the foundation. It hit me like a freight train full of justice. I legally controlled the land beneath all 50 homes. That meant I could demand the removal of every single structure built on my property and operation that would cost between $12 and $15 million. The alternative? The homeowners could buy me out. Fair market value for the subsurface rights, according to our appraiser, $45 million. When Sarah dropped this bombshell on Vivian's legal team, their $800 an hour attorney called an emergency meeting. The price tag for that one afternoon alone, $25,000, and their conclusion was devastating. Vivian had no angle, no escape, no leverage. My legal claim was airtight, ironclad. Una salable. For the first time since this war began, I wasn't just defending myself. I was holding the entire community's foundation literally in my hands. No insurance company on earth would touch a property rights dispute this massive. The foundation of their entire community literally and legally belonged to the veteran they'd tried to bury. Through my binoculars, I watched Vivian's empire collapse in real time. Moving trucks lined the pristine driveways of Willowware like ants fleeing a sinking ship. Real estate agents circled the development like vultures at a fresh carcass. Word spread fast through the mortgage industry. Title: insurance wouldn't cover these homes. Overnight, property values went from luxury to liability. The moment that symbolized it all was caught on our own security cameras. The sharp clink of Vivian's $1.2 million fountain pen hitting a marble conference table during her legal team's emergency meeting, that sound became the death rattle of her empire. Her mansion, once her crown jewel, was now worth exactly what I decided to charge for the land under it. Margaret called me that night, her voice bubbling with laughter. "Ezra, honey, Vivian's been driving around the neighborhood in circles for hours, like a lost dog chasing its tail. I think she's cracking." Tom, as usual, didn't sugarcoat it. "That woman thought she was playing chess with a country boy. Turns out you were playing three-dimensional chess while she was still fumbling with the rules." The truth was simple. The nuclear option was in my hands. I could legally force the evacuation of every home in Willower Estates, bankrupt 50 families just to watch Vivian burn. But here's what she never understood. About military training, we don't wage war on civilians. The mission is always clear. Accomplish the objective with minimal collateral damage. Vivian was the target, not the neighbors she conned, not the families she used as pawns. And in war, once the enemy is isolated, you finish the job. The leverage had flipped so completely that Vivian was cornered between two doors: financial ruin or criminal prosecution. Her stolen empire had been built on land she never owned, and now the very foundation of her power was mine to command. Justice wasn't coming, it was already here, standing on my property in combat boots, armed not with rifles but with legal documents sharp enough to cut her empire to pieces. When you're holding nuclear weapons, you don't just slam the button, you craft a strategy, maximize impact, minimize fallout. Sarah built a legal dream team that would make Pentagon war planners jealous. A military property rights attorney who had never lost a veteran's case. A forensic accountant who could trace dirty money through more layers than a wedding cake. Real estate expert whose valuations had survived Supreme Court scrutiny. Our war room was my grandfather's old study. Maps, documents, and contracts covered every inch of oak and leather, the air heavy with coffee and anticipation. This wasn't just paperwork, it was an operational campaign. 3 phases: exposure, negotiation, and if needed, total enforcement. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our forensic accountant, delivered the kill shot. With surgical precision, she traced every stolen dollar. $340,000 embezzled over 4 years, she declared, spreading color-coded charts across the table. Pool maintenance, landscaping contracts, security services, none of it real. She's been running a one-woman crime syndicate disguised as an HOA. Then came the evidence arsenal. The original mineral rights deed from 1963. Forensic ink analysis proving Vivian's tax documents were forgeries. Financial trails that tied every lie to her signature. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a military campaign of inevitability. The evidence was overwhelming, the kind of arsenal that could sink a Fortune 500 company. HOA financial records showed a pattern of self-dealing so brazen it made mob accountants look like amateurs. Video evidence, legal property modifications, all time-stamped and authenticated, sealed, the picture of fraud. But our secret weapon wasn't paperwork. It was Margaret. Her Wednesday bridge club had turned into an intelligence agency. Turned out elderly women with Chardonnay talk more than CIA operatives under interrogation. Through her casual chats, we uncovered Vivian's biggest secret: a Swiss bank account holding exactly $2.3 million, the same amount she'd funneled from my stolen property. Meanwhile, Tom had organized something breathtaking. A veterans convoy from 4 counties, combat vets, Purple Heart recipients, men and women who'd bled for the Constitution she trampled. Their motorcycles and pickup trucks would roll into Willamere like a wall of thunder, a living reminder that America still stands behind those who served. Our media strategy was psychological warfare. 101. I'd learned in the Army that public opinion campaigns run on the same principles as combat operations: precision strikes, information dominance, timing. We prepared press packets contrasting my grandfather's Bronze Star service with Vivian's theft, social media campaigns showing our family cemetery patriotism standing behind enemy lines, anonymous tips funneled to investigative journalists about corruption and her pocketed government allies. Sarah's settlement plan was pure strategy. 3 options. No escape. Return every stolen property, plus damages. Purchase the subsurface rights at fair market value. Face complete evacuation, financial collapse, and criminal prosecution. Her voice was calm, steady, lethal, like someone holding a royal flush and daring the other side to bet against it. The insurance revelation was our masterstroke of psychological warfare. Every homeowner suddenly realized their policies excluded property rights disputes. Title insurers refused to defend the impossible claim of owning homes on land that was never theirs. Overnight, families understood the truth. If forced to move, they'd lose everything: house, foundation, security. And then came the kill shot. Our environmental engineers revealed that Vivian's development had poisoned the lake with runoff from shoddy drainage systems. EPA violations meant federal jurisdiction and potential criminal charges that could cage her for years. Margaret's infiltration delivered the final blow. Vivian wasn't planning to fight this war to the end. She was planning to run offshore transfers, liquidated assets, a ticket to Switzerland. What she didn't realize was that federal authorities move faster than private jets, especially when stolen military property is involved. Meanwhile, the community uprising reached critical mass. Margaret's revolt gathered signatures from 38 of 50 residents demanding her removal. Tom's recall petition overshot the threshold by 15 signatures. Local media smelled blood after our anonymous leaks, and the state attorney general's office had opened a full fraud investigation. That night, I sat in Grandpa's chair, the oak table covered in legal ammunition. His portrait watched over me, dog tags glinting in the lamplight. I could almost hear him whisper, "Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected." By dawn, Vivian would learn the unbreakable rule: you don't steal from a veteran's family. The war machine was assembled, primed, and aimed directly at her empire. And like every cornered tyrant, desperation made her reckless. When legal warfare failed, Vivian turned to sabotage with the grace of a drowning thief swinging a sledgehammer. My family's water-wealthy same spring that had poured out crystal-clear water for 3 generations collapsed overnight. A sudden crack bone-deep in the earth drained it dry. The repair estimate, $12,000. The cause, a contractor's backhoe, and county records showed that contractor worked almost exclusively for Ashworth Aesthetics. Vivian's fingerprints were all over it, but she wasn't done. Anonymous complaints poured into the county environmental office, accusing my cattle operation of contaminating the lake with military-grade chemicals. The irony was thick enough to choke on. The woman whose shoddy construction had actually poisoned the watershed now painted me as the polluter. Inspectors showed up in starched shirts and smug expressions. They poked, scraped, tested only to find my soil cleaner than a surgical ward. Vivian's accusations evaporated, but her war moved into darker territory. Rumors spread like wildfire. Stories of my supposed violent PTSD outbursts circulated in diners, barbershops, and hardware stores. People whispered as if I were a grenade with the pin half pulled. The diner owner, whose mortgage sat neatly in Vivian's bank, stopped serving me. The hardware clerk watched me like I might snap at any moment. My reputation was being murdered in plain sight, and then came the bribe. The move that proved Vivian's mask had slipped completely. She cornered me in the courthouse parking lot, her Mercedes purring like a waiting getaway car. From her leather handbag, she dangled an offer, $500,000 in cash. Think about it, soldier, she said. Syrup is sweet with poison underneath. Veterans with trauma need quiet places. Suburban life might be too stimulating for someone like you. She said it like I was damaged cargo that needed to be quietly shipped off out of sight, out of mind. Like honor, loyalty, and bloodlines could be bought at wholesale rates. But Vivian had made her worst mistake yet. She hadn't just attacked my property. She had tried to erase me. She didn't just offer me hush money, she offered me exile. Somewhere isolated, she said, where your episodes won't scare normal people. What she didn't know was that every word, every smirk, every poisoned syllable, had been recorded since our very first meeting. Her bribe, her veiled threats, her soft-voiced promises to make my life difficult, all captured in high-definition audio. Evidence polished enough to make any prosecutor weep with joy. But Vivian wasn't finished. She'd saved her masterpiece for last. This wasn't teenagers with spray paint. These were professionals. They came on a Tuesday night, while I was at the VA for a routine checkup. Precision cuts through the perimeter fence, wire clipped clean as a surgeon's scalpel, gaps wide enough for cattle to wander straight onto the county highway. At 3:47 a.m., the call came. The call every rancher dreads. One of my grandfather's prize, Angus cow's bloodline, traced back to the herd. He built after the war lay shattered on Route 42. A semi had ended it instantly. The financial loss was crushing, the emotional one worse. That animal wasn't just livestock, it was legacy. And before the body was even cold, Vivian pounced. She called the sheriff's office herself, branding me negligent. Called the news crews, too. They circled like vultures with cameras rolling. As she performed her outrage standing beside the dead cow, crocodile tears in her eyes, she warned the community about reckless veterans who endanger innocent families. The next morning's headline made my blood boil. Troubled veterans, negligence causes highway accident. No mention of sabotage, no whispers about cut fences. Just another story about a broken soldier who couldn't hack civilian life. Meanwhile, Margaret's Bridge Club network delivered the intelligence we'd been waiting for. Vivian's nuclear option. She was filing emergency bankruptcy to wall off her fortune, transferring her mansion to a Cayman Islands. Shell Corporation, the woman who had spent 4 years stealing from her neighbors, now cried financial hardship, and while she signed fraudulent filings with one hand, the other dripped hydraulic fluid from the farm equipment her people had sabotaged. Vivian thought she was playing her final card. She didn't realize she'd already walked into checkmate. The cameras didn't lie. We caught masked figures cutting brake lines on my tractor, smashing machinery, even poisoning my grandfather's oak, the tree that had stood guard over this land for a century. Its leaves turned brown, curling into death, and with them something in me hardened. Vivian had made her fatal mistake. This wasn't property sabotage anymore. Those cut brake lines were a bullet with my name on it. She'd crossed into attempted murder, but every crime, every shadowy act of vandalism, only tightened the noose. Sarah documented everything, stacking evidence like bricks in a fortress. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had already frozen her Swiss accounts, choking the last lifeline she thought she had. Her carefully polished empire was collapsing under the weight of her own arrogance. And yet, Vivian didn't stop. She mutated. From a white-collar predator into something far darker, a creature thrashing against the bars, willing to burn everything to ash. The sound of breaking glass shattered another night, my security lights blown out. But this time, I was ready. Justice was coming. And it wore combat boots. Vivian, though, she reached a level of desperation that bordered on psychotic. Bankruptcy couldn't save her. The feds had gutted her offshore accounts before she could whisper Cayman Islands. Her shell games looked like amateur hour compared to real criminals. So she pivoted to the one weapon left in her arsenal: character. Annihilation. Her plan was simple, diabolical, and almost brilliant. She hired a professional actor, a man who looked enough like me to fool grainy cameras and half-drunk. Barfla. This fake Ezra stormed into Murphy's Tavern on a packed Friday night, starting fights, screaming about killing HOA board members, throwing threats like sparks in a tinderbox. Within hours, the footage was everywhere, edited, amplified, weaponized. A dangerous veteran making terroristic threats. And then came the masterpiece of her frame job. The planted evidence, during what should have been a routine traffic stop. Deputies found it hidden in my truck. Not my hands, not my words, not my fingerprints, but damning enough for headlines. Vivian hadn't just declared war, she'd staged the execution. The deputy didn't just find the bourbon under my seat. He uncovered it with the kind of certainty only someone who already knew it was there could have. His daughter's private school tuition was mysteriously covered by an anonymous scholarship from Ashworth Aesthetics. Vivian's empire by another name. So suddenly I'm staring down DUI charges while stone cold sober, with half a dozen witnesses who'd been with me all day. It didn't matter. The accusation was enough. Vivian's next strike was pure fiction, but masterfully weaponized. Her restraining order read like a horror novel, claiming I'd threatened her with military-style violence, that I had advanced tactical knowledge, and had openly described how to neutralize multiple targets before law enforcement could respond. Absolute lies, but terrifying on paper. The judge bought every word. The order expanded until I was banned from the entire will or development. Half my own county off limits. I couldn't even drive past my grandfather's land without risking arrest. Vivian wasn't just trying to destroy me anymore. She was trying to erase me. But while she spun her fiction, our side was gathering facts. And Margaret's Bridge Club, God bless those ladies, proved better at human intelligence than any three-letter agency. Between the Chardonnay and gossip, conspirators tend to brag. That's how we learned Vivian's real endgame. She was going to dissolve the HOA completely, liquidate every asset, and vanish overseas before indictments could land. The timeline was brutal. Transferred the remaining community funds into her personal accounts. Claimed the HOA had voted to disband because of my lawsuits. Then slip onto a one-way flight to Zurich within 72 hours. The ticket was already booked. Paid for with a credit card tied to the community pool maintenance fund. But while Vivian thought she was writing her escape, we were scripting the finale. The trap was set. Sarah had worked with federal prosecutors like a battlefield commander. The timing had to be surgical. Arrest warrants were scheduled to drop exactly 1 hour before Vivian's Zurich flight was set to depart. By then, her Swiss accounts were frozen, her assets under federal seizure, and her passport flagged in every international system that mattered. Meanwhile, the press was doing its part. Our anonymous tips had ignited a statewide investigation into HOA corruption and veteran land theft. The headlines were devastating. War hero's family cemetery desecrated by suburban dictator. Public opinion flipped overnight. Vivian couldn't buy a cup of coffee in town without enduring hostile stares. But the most powerful shift came from the convoy. Word had spread across veteran networks in 4 states. A Sisters Arms was under attack. They came in waves: combat veterans, Purple Heart recipients, Gold Star families. By the time it peaked, the thunder of motorcycles was a rolling drumbeat across the county. A reminder that America still stands guard over its own. Cornered, Vivian tried one last desperate gambit. She offered me a deal: 400 acres of my stolen land for $1.2 million, the same amount she'd paid for all 800. A compromise for the sake of peace, she called it. But the conditions made her desperation plain. Drop the criminal charges, bury the civil suits, and let her keep half of my inheritance. When I didn't flinch, the mask slipped. Take the deal, she hissed, or I'll burn the community center before I let you destroy everything I've built. This was no longer the polished socialite. This was a cornered arsonist, threatening to torch the community she once ruled just to avoid the consequences of her crimes. And then came the nail in her coffin. Margaret's Bridge Club struck again. Over 3 glasses of wine, Vivian had bragged about forging the tax documents herself. She laughed about how easy it was to fool stupid government clerks and manufacture fake delinquencies. That drunken confession, slipped into the wrong ears, was enough to seal her fate. Margaret had recorded everything, every slurred boast, every forged detail, every mocking laugh captured in crystal-clear audio on her smartphone. It was the bullet we'd been waiting for. The plan was simple. Tomorrow's community meeting would become a tribunal. Vivian thought she was walking in to deliver her grand ultimatum, but instead she was walking straight into her own execution. The legal kind. What she didn't know was that the FBI was already in position. Her bank accounts frozen, her escape routes monitored, her passport flagged. The net was so tight she couldn't have slipped through it with a razor. And tomorrow, in front of 200 witnesses, her own voice would damn her more completely than any lawyer ever could. That night, the air vibrated with the sound of engines. Car doors slammed in unison. The veteran convoy was arriving early, their formation as disciplined as any forward operating base we'd ever secured overseas, by 6 p.m. sharp. The community center parking lot looked like a staging ground for a combat deployment. 30 motorcycles and pickups formed a hardened perimeter. American flags mounted on chrome and steel, catching the last rays of sunset like battle standards. Combat, veterans, men and women, who had stood in Fallujah, Mosul took their positions in silence. Leather jackets, Boer unit patches, and Purple Heart insignias, not fashion statements but scars stitched into fabric. This wasn't a protest. It wasn't theater. It was an honor guard. It was a shield. It was America, standing between a corrupt tyrant and the family she tried to destroy. These were men and women who had bled for the Constitution Vivian had trampled. Inside the community center, the tension was thick enough to slice with a bayonet. 200 residents filled every seat. Local media crews jockeying for angles as if they were covering a presidential debate. Sheriff Mitchell had stationed deputies at every exit officially for crowd control, but everyone in the room knew the real purpose. No one was leaving early tonight. Vivian made her entrance like royalty descending into the provinces. A white Mercedes purred to the curb, and she stepped out in a designer suit that probably cost more than a year's mortgage. Her $800 an hour attorney followed close behind. Briefcase gleaming, his face radiating smug superiority, she strutted through the crowd like a queen, acknowledging peasants. Her perfect makeup and polished posture, a sharp contrast to the working neighbors she'd spent years exploiting. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice smooth, confident, calculated. That politician's cadence warmed to the ear, venom to the soul. I've called this meeting to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding with our neighbor, Mr. Thornfield. Despite his military service, which we all respect, certain legal complexities require adult supervision. The condescension dripped like acid. Here was a woman who had stolen from her neighbors, embezzled funds, and committed federal crimes, lecturing a combat veteran about adult supervision. She pulled a document from her leather folder, as if reading terms of surrender. I am prepared to offer a generous settlement, she continued. Mr. Thornfield may repurchase 400 acres of the disputed property for $1.2 million, a significant discount that reflects our community's appreciation for veterans. In exchange, all legal proceedings will cease, and we may move forward in harmony. The arrogance was suffocating. That's when I stood. The room froze. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Only the faint creak of leather jackets broke the silence as 30 veterans straightened in unison, their presence like a wall of granite at my back. Vivian, I said, my voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who had stared down enemies with rifles in their hands. I appreciate the offer, but before we talk about money, let's talk about ownership. I gave a slight nod to Sarah. With deliberate precision, she activated the projector. The screen behind me lit up, filling the hall with a crisp, glowing image. The original 1963 mineral rights documents, complete with my grandfather's signature and the official county seal. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Vivian's smirk faltered for the first time all evening. These documents, I announced, my voice cutting through the silence, prove that I own the subsurface rights beneath every mansion in Willower Estates. That means every foundation, every basement, every septic system sits on land that legally belongs to me. The reaction was instant. The crowd gasped as if the air had been sucked from the room. Real estate agent Patricia Wells, whose own house stood on my property, muttered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the back row to hear. The current market value for these subsurface rights is $47 million. I continued, watching Vivian's face drain of color faster than her bank account. Alternatively, all 50 homes could be relocated at a cost of $15 million. Your choice. Vivian's attorney suddenly began stuffing papers into his briefcase, his frantic movements betraying panic. The sharp snap of expensive Italian leather echoed like a gavel in the stunned silence. But I'm not finished, I said, turning the blade. Since we're discussing ownership, let's also discuss theft. Margaret rose from her seat, her hand trembling but steady enough to hold her smartphone aloft like evidence in a trial. I have a recording of Vivian Ashworth confessing to forging tax documents and stealing veteran property, she declared. Would you like to hear it? The answer was obvious. She pressed play. Vivon's own voice filled the room, slurred with wine, arrogant with entitlement. It's laughably easy to fool those stupid government clerks. Fake tax delinquencies, fake seizures. They never even check the paperwork. Each word slammed down like a hammer, nailing her fate shut. That's when FBI agent Rodriguez stepped up into the aisle. His badge caught the fluorescent light, gleaming like a verdict already written. Vivan Ashworth, he said, voice calm but commanding. You are under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. The community center exploded like a stadium after a championship win. Applause, cheers, shouts of vindication. Cameras flashed, capturing every second of her downfall. Vivon's mask shattered. She shrieked about communist conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors as agents closed in, cuffing her with clinical precision. Agent Rodriguez read her rights over the chaos, his voice steady, final, the sound of justice landing at last. This is persecution, Vivon shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. I built this community. I protected your property values. You should be thanking me. Sheriff Mitchell stepped forward, his own warrant in hand. Ma'am, you're also under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and about 15 other charges. We'll go over downtown. The click of the second set of handcuffs rang sweeter than church bells on a Sunday morning. As deputies marched her out, her designer heels clattering against the linoleum, the veterans in the room rose in unison, not for her, but for justice finally served. From the back, Tom's voice thundered. That's how we handle enemies of America, folks. The ovation shook the walls. 3 full minutes of stomping, clapping, and cathartic release. Outside, the roar of veteran convoys firing up their motorcycles rolled through Willower like freedom's own thunder. Justice moved swift and merciless. V drew 5 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution, every stolen penny tracked, seized, and returned with interest. The crooked county assessor who enabled her scam lost his pension, served 2 years, and was permanently barred from public office. Watching those parasites face consequences felt better than Christmas morning after a year-long deployment. 6 months later, my family's 1,500 acres were back under rightful ownership. The new HOA board, Margaret as president, Tom as treasurer, operated with radical transparency, monthly financial reports, open book policies, a constitutional amendment requiring unanimous approval for any expense over $500. No more dictators, no more secrets, just neighbors working together in peace. And as for the land, I could have bankrupted 50 families. Instead, I sold the subsurface rights at 20% below market, $8.2 million. Spread over 10 years, 0 interest. A veteran's discount for people who'd been lied to and deceived. For the first time in years, Willower wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a community again. The Homeowners Association finally served its purpose, protecting homeowners instead of enriching corrupt board members. For me, healing came in quiet, unexpected ways. I built my new ranch house on the hill above our family cemetery, where every morning and evening I could see my grandfather's headstone. The rose garden was replanted with heritage varieties, their fragrance carrying the same sweetness I remembered from childhood. Those roses had already survived 1 war. They would damn sure survive 1 corrupt HOA president. The transformation spread farther than any of us imagined. Under Margaret's leadership, the HOA became a model of competence and compassion. Tom organized monthly veteran support groups, helping soldiers navigate property rights before they turned into legal nightmares. Our community library workshops grew into a statewide program, teaching citizens how to shield themselves from municipal corruption and HOA abuse. Even the press found its backbone. Patricia Kane, our local editor, won a state journalism award for her investigative series, proving that small-town reporting can still shake foundations when truth takes priority over access. Her stories sparked legislative reforms mandating audits for every HOA and criminal background checks for board candidates. But the crown jewel of our victory was the Thornfield Veterans Scholarship Fund. Seeded with $500,000 from the settlement, it ensures that children of deployed service members never have to choose between their parents' duty and their own future. In just 5 years, 47 students have gone to college on that fund. 3 now wear military uniforms of their own, and 2 became attorneys fighting for veterans' rights. What's your worst HOA nightmare? Drop it in the comments below. Let's shine a light on these petty tyrants together. And if you want more true stories of underdogs who fought back and won, hit that subscribe button.